Good afternoon. Welcome to the Texas edition of our webinar series exploring state findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future. Before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics. First, everyone has been muted, so no need to worry about background noise on your end. Second, you see in the agenda that we have a questions opportunity toward the end of the webinar, and let me explain how you would ask a question or make a comment. On the control panel on the right-hand side, you see an orange oblong box with a white arrow in it. That closes and opens the control panel. If you see in the control panel, there's a questions section. On the far right-hand side there, you see a little box with an arrow sticking out of it. If you click on that, the questions tab pops open and it gives you an opportunity to put a question or a comment in there. And again, we will get to those at the end of the webinar. Below that questions tab, there's also a handouts tab. If you click on that and open that, it will take you to a link to the full report as well as to the Texas 2-page summary, which we're going to talk through later in the webinar. We are recording the webinar. Everybody will get a copy of the recording. So if you've missed anything, you can go back and watch it again, or please feel free to share it with folks who were not able to make it, but you think might be interested in the findings. And so with that, let me introduce myself and my co-host. My name is Chris Coffin. I direct AFT's National Agricultural Land Network, and let me take a minute to talk about that. That is an information and peer learning network for anyone who is interested in techniques and tools to save farm and ranch land. It is intended primarily for a professional audience, but if you are working at the local level and are looking for folks to talk to about techniques and tools around permanent ag land protection or planning and zoning or anything in between, this network is a place where you can find other people who are wanting to know the same thing. We do have quite a bit of programming. We welcome folks joining us, and importantly, it is free. And we'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. I'm also AFT's Senior Policy Advisor. I specialize in farmland protection, land access, farm transfer and succession, and farm viability. With me today is Billy Van Pelt. Billy is AFT's Director of Special Program Development and Senior Advisor. Billy is a licensed landscape architect and has been working on land use and farmland protection for over 25 years. So thank you ever so much for joining today, Billy. Great to have you. And for those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, let me take a minute to talk about us. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. We are also the only national agricultural land trust. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker, but the bumper sticker before this one said, "It's not farmland without farmers." We understand agriculture and we take a holistic approach to it. Our national initiatives and our regional programs focus not just on protecting the agricultural land base, but also on the practices being used on the land, and importantly, on the farmers and ranchers who steward that land. Not just the ones who are on the land now, but those who aspire to be on in the future. Our programs and our research inform our state and federal policy advocacy, and we work from farm fields and kitchen tables to the halls of state capitals and Congress with 6 regional offices and a national headquarters in Washington, D.C. And with that, let me turn it over to Billy.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you all for joining us today. We'd like to recognize and thank USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service for their partnership and financial support of our Farms Under Threat research. Farms Under Threat is AFT's multi-year initiative to document the status of and threats to America's agricultural land base. NRCS has been an invaluable partner to this entire research project, as has our research partner, conservation science partners. For this report, we also collaborated with the University of Wisconsin, Madison.
Great, thank you, Billy. Okay, so now Billy and I are going to turn our cameras off so that you all can see the charts and then the maps in a larger version. And we are going to jump right in now to the methodology and findings from the report. So the first two Farms Under Threat reports, Farms Under Threat State of America's Farmland, released in 2018, and Farms Under Threat State of the States, which we released in 2020, mapped past conversion of agricultural land, looking first from 1992 to 2012, and then from 2001 to 2016. In this report, we're looking forward. We're using that past conversion data to model and predict future conversion of farm and ranch land out to 2040. We started with our Farms Under Threat State of the State analysis of ag land conversion from 2001 to 2016. And as a reminder, that analysis mapped conversion of land to two different types, which we're going to talk about now: urban and high density development and low density residential development. So let's look at the spectrum of that development. Here on the left-hand side, you see urban and highly developed land is the traditional culprit in farmland conversion. It includes residential, industrial, and commercial areas typically found in and around cities and towns. It also includes rural and industrial sites such as oil and gas infrastructure and solar development. Anything that can be identified by satellite remote sensing as built up. Low density residential development, which you can see here toward the right-hand side, has become a more pervasive culprit in agricultural land conversion. AFT worked with conservation science partners to pioneer an approach to map and quantify the impacts of this type of development on the agricultural land base. These areas, as you can see from the pictures, range from lower density subdivisions to larger scale farmettes and ranchettes. This kind of scattered large lot housing fragments the agricultural land base and makes production harder for the farms and ranches that remain. It's important to note that some agriculture can be found on these low-density residential areas. And some of these smaller farms and ranches, especially those near urban centers, can be quite profitable and sustainable. However, our research has found that once land has been converted to low-density residential land use, it is far more likely to be further converted to urban and high-density land. So, starting with our historical data, we projected into the future with a business as usual scenario. Basically, we made a straight line projection using the same annual conversion rate as what we documented from 2001 to 2016 to predict the level and location of conversion by 2040. We adjusted the model to account for projected population growth or decline. Building off that business as usual scenario, we developed two alternative scenarios, which we'll get to in a minute. In each of the three scenarios, we also mapped the coastal flooding risk that is projected by sea level rise. Once we had our projection of conversion and flooding risk, we quantified the effects of these scenarios, and we did that based on agricultural land types. So is that conversion of cropland, pasture land, rangeland, as well as looking as how different quality of agricultural land will be converted. And for that we used a productivity, versatility, and resiliency index that we developed in 2020, and we'll talk about in a minute. As with any modeling exercise, there are some caveats. Most importantly, we were not able to account for local zoning, since land use regulations are inherently local and there's no national database to draw from. This means that our maps represent the general pattern and rough amount of conversion that is likely based on those 2001 to 2016 conversion patterns. They do not reflect what may be allowed or prohibited on the ground through local land use regulations. Our modeling also does not include the impact of water scarcity and potential fallowing of land because of water scarcity or salinization. Mapping this impact is extremely complex and was beyond the scope of this analysis. You'll see in the website, though, when we get there, that we did include a data overlay from World Resource Institute's Aqueduct, which offers some projections about water availability in the future. So here are the three scenarios we modeled. First, business as usual. Again, that takes the 2001 to 2016 data and makes a straight line projection out to 2040. The second scenario is what we call runaway sprawl. This envisions a scenario where sprawl actually gets worse. We see this trajectory as entirely possible and may already be happening in some places, driven by continued high housing costs and shortages in large and small cities, and the likely permanent shift to more remote work opportunities. Remote work will likely become even more appealing as rural broadband expands and improves. Lastly, we modeled the future we hope for, better built cities. This scenario envisions successful efforts to reduce the footprint of residential and commercial and industrial development on productive agricultural land. While the scenario still results in the conversion of some farm and ranch land, it envisions a future with vibrant, compact cities and towns and abundant agricultural land to meet the needs of the future. So a quick look at the assumptions that went into the three scenarios. For business as usual, you see here that historical rate that we used that is adjusted only on that urban and high density development front. And that is because there's a strong correlation between population growth and urban and high density conversion. In runaway sprawl, you see we kept that rate of urban and high density conversion the same as in the business as usual scenario, but we expanded the amount of conversion likely through low density residential land use, and we did it 50% higher. Again, this is borne by an indication of low density residential land use being what is fueling a lot of agricultural land conversion. Conversely, in better built cities, you see that we drop that rate of urban and high density conversion to 25% less. This is based on evidence that there are cities that have been able to grow in a more compact way. And we took a more aggressive approach on the low density residential conversion of thinking that that could be brought down to be 50% lower with some aggressive means of trying to grow more compactly. So this next chart shows each scenario's potential impact. You look here on the left, we start here with the gray areas, which is actually the 11 million acres that were converted across the US in just the first 15 years of this century. And for comparison, 12% of that conversion, or about 1.3 million acres of that conversion, was in Texas. Under business as usual or runaway sprawl, we may see another 18.4 to 24.4 million acres of farm and ranch land converted or threatened by conversion. And conversely, you see that in our better built cities scenario, if we can be making smart choices about where and how we site future development, we can reduce that conversion of farm and ranch land. You may be thinking 11 million acres, that's still a lot. Is that really a best case scenario? From AFT's perspective, we appreciate that development, including renewable energy development, is necessary, and the need for affordable housing options is acute. While it may be possible for cities and towns to be even more compact in their growth, and we hope they can be, we chose what we believed was a realistic scenario. These next two slides we hope are helpful in showing how Texas compares to other states and seeing at the county level what things are happening in Texas. This slide shows the projected total acres converted by county. The darker the red or the rust, the more acres converted. And you can see here that there are a lot of very dark counties here in Texas and across the Southwest US. This next slide looks at the percent of agricultural land in each county that is projected to be developed. You see a different pattern here, and again, probably these counties in Texas are ones where there is already a smaller agricultural land base to begin with in the county and quite a bit of conversion within that. This next chart is one you don't want to see your state on, let alone at the top of the list. Texas ranks highest in projected total acres of agricultural land converted out to 2040. Our modeling projects that Texas will lose nearly 2.2 million acres of agricultural land, and even more when you look at the runaway sprawl scenario. Looking at this next slide, this is quite sobering because of the top 12 counties in the US with the greatest projected loss of farm and ranch land, Texas has 8 of the top 12. We'll look at some of these counties more when we get into the website. Another key finding relates to impacts on our very best agricultural land. For previous reports, AFT created the first ever index of agricultural land quality that looked at the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of land, or what we called its PVR value. Land over a certain PVR threshold is land that American Farmland Trust considers nationally significant land which is best suited for long-term cultivation and food production. You can see in Texas that there's quite a lot of nationally significant land. What we find in our future projections is that conversion of this land is likely to be higher than conversion of all agricultural land in general, likely because for the very reason that it is highly productive. It's flat, it's well drained, it's free of rocks. It is also the most easily developed. The loss of this land is especially concerning. This is land that can produce the highest yields of crops and livestock with the least environmental impact. Our modeling shows that nearly half of the projected conversion from 2016 to 2040 will occur on nationally significant land, even though it represents only 38% of the country's agricultural land base. The more nationally significant land converted, the more reliant we become on marginal land for food production. And to put this potential loss of 9 million acres of nationally significant land in perspective, the total acreage of land in the US devoted to all fruit and nut and vegetable production is just 10.4 million acres. So this next slide, you see that Texas makes the top of this list as well. And again, these are the top 12 states in terms of acres of nationally significant land that is likely to be converted. While this is this 990,000 acres projected here is a relatively small percent of the state's 33 million acres of nationally significant ag land, the loss of this land affects both future production and profitability as farmers and ranchers in the impacted counties look to offset the loss of this highly productive land with more marginal farm ground. Reliance on this more marginal land can also have environmental impacts as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to Billy to walk us through the next few slides.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate your overview here, which set the stage for this next set of data that I'll be presenting today. The next finding we want to highlight relates to coastal flooding. As a result of projected sea level rise, we mapped what this might look like in 2040 based on 7.5 inches of additional sea level rise. We found that 450,000 acres of farmland and ranch land could be flooded by 2040, including 4,000 acres in Texas. This number does not include the salinization of soils and groundwater, which will jeopardize many more acres, even before land is inundated. Additionally, we found that nearly 500,000 acres of existing urban, highly developed, and low-density residential land will be flooded nationally, causing some residents to seek more stable housing. The result is another 2.7 million acres of ag land nationally could be converted to development. So quite simply, as our coastal areas begin to flood, it's not just an issue of flooding our farmland, it's the inland migration that will be caused by this, threatening more productive farm and rangeland inland. Moving forward, one of the other threats we are highlighting with this report is the threat that solar development poses to agricultural land. We want to be clear here. American Farmland Trust supports renewable energy development. However, we think it's essential that we plan carefully so that our most productive, versatile, and resilient land is not compromised. We also think it's possible for agriculture and solar to coexist in mutually beneficial ways. This map shows projected acres of utility scale solar photovoltaics energy generation facilities by state in 2040. So the darker the color, the more acres in utility scale solar. Want to be clear about that. This data comes from the decarbonization with electrification scenario of the U.S. Department of Energy Solar Future Study. That study estimates there will be 7.4 million acres of utility scale solar in place by 2040 to meet federal energy goals. This map shows the percent of undeveloped land projected to be used for solar development based on the same Department of Energy Solar Future Study. So now that we are looking at this, we're looking at these percentages. So notice the scale on the lower right corner of the map. The darker the color, the more percent of undeveloped land is being used in solar. So you can see the states that clearly are under the greatest threat here. We did model conversion of land to solar development, but did not include that data later in this report because of questions around the data. There is some information about solar modeling results in our solar technical paper that is available through the Farmland Information Center. That website is farmlandinfo.org, and we'll cover that again at the end of the presentation. We will also be releasing a solar white paper later this year. The most important findings from our modeling were that 83% of the projected solar development by 2040 will be sited on agricultural land, and nearly half of the projected solar will be sited on that nationally significant land that we were talking about a few minutes ago, that land that's very finite and that is available for long-term agricultural production. Now, we're going to do a dive into the data available for Texas on our interactive website. And for this, we're going to be joined by our colleague, Beth Fraser, who will be our navigator here. Thank you, Beth.
Great, thank you, Billy, and thank you, Beth, for your excellent navigating. Let me remind folks that we do have time built in at the end for questions or for comments. So again, for those of you who may have arrived late, to pose a question, you see the questions tab in that control panel. If you look to the far right-hand side, there's a little box with an arrow. Click on that. That'll pop the questions tab out, allowing you to write in a question. And for right now, if that control panel is in the way and you can't see the maps as fully as you want, use that little arrow in the orange oblong box at the top of the control panel to shrink it, and you can pop it right back out again. So we are in the website, and Beth at some point will put in the link to the website in the chat here. But when you first get to the website, this is what you see, this cover page about what we did, what we found. Again, it's essentially what I just talked through. To get out of here, you just go up to the top and click on that little arrow at the X right at the top right-hand side. And while we are up at the top right-hand side of the website, let's talk about these tabs that are up here. You see an About tab. That takes you right back to that to this cover page. And again, you remember how to get out of it. Next to that, you see a How-To tab. That takes you to a 5-minute video that explains how to use the various data layers in the scenarios. Next to that, you see a View Report tab. That takes you to our Farmland Information Center that Billy mentioned, where you can find all kinds of things. So you see here, Beth has taken us to there. You see here a way to get to the full report, the executive summary. There are technical reports. So if you want to know more about the methodologies, you see here the solar technical report. And down at the bottom, you see the State of the States report, which is where you can find a lot more information. You can actually go back to that interactive website and look at comparisons. So that's all on the Farmland Information Center. And then lastly, you'll see a Request Data tab. If you're interested in any of the GIS layers, or you're interested in more information about individual counties or all of the counties in Texas, feel free to fill out that report looking for what kind of data you are looking for and whether it's spatial or it's just data, and we will be back in touch. So with that, now we are going to zoom into Texas, and we do that. You just click anywhere on the state. And what comes up, you see down below, is on the left-hand side, the statewide information, and on the right-hand side, the information for the county for wherever your cursor was when you clicked on the state of Texas. Then you know that you can just move around here, but right now we are on Falls County. So looking down below at these two, you see that both are split between the darker red or rust, and that is the urban and high density development, and the lighter orange is the low density residential development. And you see for Texas that there's actually quite a bit of conversion that is urban and high density development. Under the runaway sprawl, it's not surprising that there is much more of that low density residential land use. In Falls County, you can see it's a very different story, and that's one county where low density residential land use is likely to be the largest driver of ag land conversion there. So let's keep going down and see what else you can see in this data here. It tells you the acres of Texas best agricultural land that is projected to be converted. And basically what we're looking at there is that it's the upper half of that most productive land. So land with the top 50% of that productivity and versatility resiliency index is in here. And so it shows that 73% of that conversion is likely to be on these better quality lands. And you can see here that it's almost 1.6 acres into the business as usual scenario, and that 2 million under runaway sprawl. What is important here and to point out is that we have done all of these conversion data at the county level, which is new for us. We think that this will be extremely valuable for county officials and county planners to be able to really see what the impacts are for your particular county. If you want to know more about this PVR values and how they were derived, you can see right below there's a PVR fact sheet that you can link to. And then we talked about what kind of land type is likely to be converted. And here you see that the largest amount of conversion, not surprisingly for Texas, is rangeland at 1 million acres, followed by pasture land and followed by cropland at about 406,000 acres. And a note about this woodland figure, this is not all the forested land in Texas, obviously. What this is woodland associated with a farm or a ranch. And in the 2020 Farms Under Threat report and research, we were able to map the woodland that was associated with a farm or a ranch. And so this is just that type of woodland that is specifically tied to a farm or a ranch. At the bottom here, you see what we were mentioning about low density residential paving the way for further development. In Texas, land that was in low density residential land use in 2016 is 23 times more likely to be converted to urban and high density development by 2040. So with that, we're going to take a minute and go to the downloadable report here that Beth is clicking on, this little blue tab. This is a very easily printed, easily downloaded, easily shared two-pager, which we hope folks will use with policymakers, with members of any organization, if you are here representing an organization, with county officials, with reporters and journalists. Again, we can think of many uses for this information and folks who might be interested in it. So here again, you see the projected conversion under business as usual as 2.19 million acres of farmland and ranch land. What you see here is that we have done some additional analysis of what that translates into in terms of likely loss and impacts on the agricultural sector. So with that amount of conversion, that translates roughly into potential loss of 11,900 farms, $479 million in lost farm input, and 26,200 jobs in the farm sector. Again, those numbers you see here are based on county averages and derived from the 2017 Census of Agriculture. And then if you look below, we're talking about that 73% of conversion occurring on that upper half of quality land in the state. And below that, you see three of the counties that are hardest hit. I think that Billy and Beth are going to look at maybe one or two of those as well as others. Those are ones I think that are by total acres, not by percent of ag land base. And if you go down below, you see here again more of the information that we talked about at the beginning. So we hope that folks will find this two-pager to be very useful and something that can be shared with folks who might be interested. And with that, I'm now going to turn it over to Billy, who with Beth's help is going to take us into looking in depth in some of the mapping.
Thanks, Chris. And Beth, I'd like to just sort of get started here. Let's dive in. So we're going to zoom in here initially on Bexar County, and I want to draw your attention to the legend. If we could take a look at the legend, Beth. So you can see that the dark gray, these are urbanized areas, and our green are our most productive, versatile, and resilient farmlands. And our gold or light yellow are our most productive, versatile, and resilient rangelands. Just making that clear to everyone. And of course, you can see that we're around San Antonio. So you see that big arc of productive, versatile, and resilient soil around the east, the south, and the southwest of San Antonio, with some PVR rangeland in the northwest. So Beth, would you mind selecting the runaway sprawl scenario on the left, please? So you can see with the orange and red These are the projections by 2040 of runaway sprawl, and you can see what that is going to look like in Bexar County, literally eclipsing the most productive, versatile, and resilient farmland and rangeland in that county. But Beth, if we could go on the right side to the better built cities scenario, you can see that the impact is a fraction. So we are going from a scenario of 147,900 acres to 66,000 acres. That's what we're talking about here when we talk about better built cities. All right, Beth, if we could go to our next county. I'll say that if you look at the state summary that Chris was talking about earlier, you can clearly see the top 3 counties that are under the greatest threat or the hardest hit: Bexar, Harris, and Tarrant. So Beth, if we could go up around Fort Worth, to the west of Fort Worth, and highlight Parker County. So the point to this slide is we can see what's happening there now, but you can see what could happen, not just in this county, but what is coming in this direction for Parker County from Fort Worth and Dallas. The county, I mean, you can see in the runaway sprawl scenario, the county has significant growth of low density and urban high density development, but the impact is going to be when Fort Worth starts to expand into that area. You can also see in Parker County a significant amount of productive, versatile, and resilient soils, farmland, and productive, versatile, and resilient rangeland, all of which is potentially on the table as Fort Worth grows in the future, and it has the potential to become even more of a bedroom community. Beth, if we could go on to the next community, please. So our next community that we're going to be focusing on today is Comal County. And again, same scenario here, where you have a county that's on the northern edge of San Antonio, a major metropolitan area. And it's also along the interstate corridor between Austin and San Antonio. And most of the folks on this call know what happens when you have development along an interstate corridor and a series of interstate interchanges. That area is subject to significant growth. So in Comal County, you can see the critical mass of the productive, versatile, and resilient rangeland. There's some light yellow and dark yellow there, but you can also see the sprawl, certainly in the runaway scenario, of what we stand to lose there. So just want to make sure you all take a real note to see not only what's apparent and happening around major metropolitan areas, but also what could happen when you look at counties that adjoin major metropolitan areas. So we encourage you to go into this tool to cruise around on your own. And if you have any questions, we'll provide you our contact information at the end, and we're happy to walk you through this. So now back to you, Chris.
Great. Thank you very much, Billy, and thank you, Beth, again for your navigating. I want to remind people that if you have questions or comments, please do so by putting them in through that questions tab on the control panel. And Billy, I will say that we have been politely corrected in our pronunciation of the county, which should be pronounced, although we have 2 different people who have 2 different suggestions on how to pronounce it, whether it's B-R or Bear. So apologies to all of you for not pronouncing it right but thank you for letting us know how it should be pronounced. And with that, now that we've talked about the findings, we actually want to take a few minutes to talk about action and what each of us can do to help choose an abundant future. So you see here that our report has policy recommendations in each of these 4 categories and at every level of government. So if you are a county or a municipal official, a state legislator, a state agency employee, or a congressional staffer, we hope you'll find a recommendation in here that you'd like to champion. Please let us know if we can provide you with any additional information about any of the policy ideas in the report. And if you're a farmer, a rancher, a landowner, a community advocate, you work for a farm or a conservation or a smart growth organization, we encourage you to share and discuss these recommendations with your elected and agency representatives and partners. Let me highlight just a few of the things we discuss in the recommendations. So first, foundational to smart growth and compact development is good local planning. Comprehensive or master or general plans can provide the vision and roadmap for land use regulations that promote compact development and minimize development of a community's best farmland. We encourage communities to have comprehensive plans and encourage folks who care about the future of agriculture to get involved in their local or county comprehensive plan development and review process. We also encourage states to support local comprehensive planning and to have a statewide plan for agricultural land retention and protection. Protecting agricultural land. Congress will be writing a new farm bill next year. An important program in that bill is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which helps to fund the purchase of agricultural conservation easements from willing farmers, ranchers, and landowners. More funding for that program would help protect more farm and ranch land in Texas. Under advanced smart solar siting, state and local governments both can incentivize solar development on existing infrastructure and marginal land, as well as incentivize agrivoltaics or dual use solar development. If solar is located on productive agricultural land, local governments should ensure that that development adheres to best practices, not just for the decommissioning of the facility, but for its construction and operation in order to preserve soil health, water resources, and the ability to farm the land during and after the life of the project. And lastly, around farmland access, which we know is a huge issue as we're in the midst of this generational transfer of land and agricultural assets. State and local governments can develop their own or help to support extension or nonprofit programming that provides assistance to older farmers, ranchers, and landowners looking for a successor or a long-term farm tenant. And programming that helps farm seekers looking to identify and assess land access opportunities. Facilitating these connections requires sustained assistance, and this technical assistance can be extremely valuable in keeping land in agriculture. And now Billy's going to talk a little more about planning for agriculture and smart growth strategies.
Thanks, Chris. Community planning is critically important to smart growth. As part of this planning, AFT encourages communities to plan proactively for agriculture. And this really involves these 4 basic principles. Principles that can work in tandem with efforts to plan for smarter, more compact development. Many resources on AFT's website can help you plan for agriculture, and they can be found on our Farmland Information Center website as well at farmlandinfo.org, and we'll hope that you check them out. So let me also touch on some planning strategies that we feel are important. So inventorying for planning for agriculture, inventorying resources. These aren't just your most productive, versatile, and resilient soils. They're all the resources in your agricultural areas. They're your watersheds, your aquifers, your blue line streams, historic and cultural assets, scenic view sheds, and existing conserved properties that help build that critical mass of farmland as you preserve additional farmland. Engaging farmers and ranchers in the process, critically important that they be engaged in the planning process. Communities that have planning and zoning, this is typically a public process, comprehensive planning, but also to just bring them in and to talk with them. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What are the needs in the individual communities that they're operating in to conserve the future of agriculture? And incorporating agriculture into community plans, incredibly important. This may be a chapter in your comprehensive plan that is specifically for agriculture. Or it could be a plan that is adopted as part of your comprehensive plan, such as a rural land management plan that becomes your guiding document for the future of agriculture that's just adopted during a comprehensive planning update process. If you're in a community that does not have planning and zoning or comprehensive planning, I think providing the most tools and expertise that are available to those officials and decision makers to help them plan as best they can for the future of that community, and then implementing the tools to retain and protect agricultural land. So we've talked about those a little bit. Urban growth boundaries, large lot minimums in rural areas. So you have lots that are agricultural units. Agricultural zoning, so that your farmland and ranchland areas are for agriculture and agribusinesses and agritourism, agricultural zoning, and that zoning prohibits non-agricultural uses. And then having a goal, a county by county goal for permanently protected farmland to protect the agriculture industries in that county. And, you know, agriculture and community planning and cities go hand in glove. Rural areas provide the context for urban areas. And so another strategy is farmland protection programs. These can be state and local. They can be a state purchase of agricultural conservation easement program. It could be a local PACE program or a purchase of development rights program. Land trusts are critically important. American Farmland Trust is honored that we partner with the Texas Agricultural Land Trust under Chad Ellis's leadership. We partner very closely with TALT, and we look forward to working with them in the future. And we've talked about having a goal for permanent farmland protection in the comprehensive plans in those communities. And if we could go to the next slide, please. I just want to touch a little bit on cost of community services. So American Farmland Trust, if you look at the graphic on the right, AFT has done over 80 cost of community services studies across the nation, and generally they all say the same thing. Sprawl uses more in services than it pays in taxes, and ag uses less in services than it pays in taxes, and your core urban areas are using even less. This is the financial equivalent of what we mean when we talk about smart growth, compact contiguous development. It's not only good for agriculture and the environment, it's good for the city's financial picture. Providing services, sanitary sewers, water, streets, roads, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, street lights, police and fire. All of those things are ongoing costs as you sprawl away from the urban core. And the further you get away from the urban core, the more expensive it is. And it's very challenging for communities to close that gap on the extra amount that sprawl is costing to provide services um, relative to the dollar that it's paying. Again, those cost of community services studies can be seen on our Farmland Information Center website at farmlandinfo.org. But that's really critical. Another thing that communities have done is to quantify the impact of agriculture in your community, the ag economic impact for your community. And I've been involved in several ag economic impact studies that are at the county level. And when you look at the amount of the economic impact of agriculture, the revenues generated by agriculture, the number of jobs, we've quantified that at the state level, but it's also possible to do it at the county level. And I would encourage you to work with your local universities and ag economists to generate such a study. And if you've never seen one, I have two that I can share with you. So right now, I think we have time to catch a few questions. Chris, do we have questions that we can answer?
We do indeed. So there are a few, and again, please feel free to put some additional questions in the box or comments if you would like. So the first one is simple. Well, it's not. The first question was, is there a GIS representation of this slide? I couldn't tell which slide, but I think that there is, again, most of the GIS data layers can be gotten, that's not correct English, from AFT. So please do fill out the request data tab, and that will give you all of the, we can get you all of the spatial data layers that we have. The second question is, do you have information on the expected impacts of irrigation, water availability, drought, and heat due to climate change? It's a really good question. Again, as we mentioned, we were not able to model the impact of water, and I assume that would be both groundwater and surface water availability. So that is a no. In terms of the impact of climate and impact on heat and drought, we are doing some additional modeling around climate impacts, and stay tuned, because we are releasing some additional information on that within the next year, and that is doing some predictive modeling around how certain crop production is likely to shift based on changes in climate. There is a question in here.
And Chris, could I
yes, you go right, jump right on in.
Just if I could add to what Chris has said, we would be, while our data is available, we share our data in our shapefiles, this is county level data. And we would welcome the opportunity to partner with an individual county or counties. Now, that would be a relationship that we would have to talk about in detail, but we are launching pilot projects in states that want to be very intentional about how they're planning for the future of agriculture. And in fact, we have one such project in Texas, and I'd be happy to discuss that with you in detail about how such a partnership would work.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. That is a very helpful addition to that answer. There are a couple more. One is, how much of the nationally significant land is used for commodity crop production, especially corn and soy? And specifically, have you analyzed the acreage and % of nationally significant land used in producing corn for ethanol? I would say on the nationally significant land, the way that we looked at that productivity, versatility, and resiliency index, that crop type is part of it. Soil suitability is part of it, and land use patterns is part of it, so that it is that nationally significant land is more likely to be cropland. But again, we did not break it out by commodity type, and know in terms of how much percent of the land is being used in producing corn for ethanol. That is not something that we have looked at particularly. So with that, let me take one last question, which I think I see here, which is, and actually it's sort of more of a comment, are the future potential nature conservation areas considered as an extraction from active agricultural land? In Europe, it is being promoted to set aside some areas and left for nature conservation in the farms, even though it can be beneficial for agriculture activity. So we did not model what future nature conservation areas might be. Again, we were looking specifically at agricultural land conversion. And again, I think looking at the impacts of conversion in the future is what will it do in terms of both working lands and natural lands. So good question, but that is not particularly something that we looked at. So with that, I don't see any other questions. So let me take just a minute here at the end, because that's about what we have, to talk about the Farmland Information Center. We took you to it earlier in our cruise through the website, but I do want to mention what they all have available. They are a wealth of information. It is a collaboration that we do with USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service, and it's an information clearinghouse, both for landowners and for those who work with landowners and think about farmland and ranch land on a daily basis. There is information about agricultural conservation easements. There is data about the Census of Agriculture, about any number of other types of data sets from USDA. There's information about policy, and if one is interested about how would a county go about creating a county purchase of agricultural conservation easement program, you could find that information on the Farmland Information Center. Importantly, what is great about that center is that they have a call-in number. So if one does not like to use or does not have good internet, here is the telephone option, and we hope that people will use that. And then just another mention of the National Agricultural Land Network. Again, we hope that folks will consider joining. Importantly, it is free. The network is only as good as the types of people and the number of people as we have on the network. So again, we are interested in having members and being able to have conversation that is relevant to Texans around agricultural land use and retention and protection. So please do join us. And with that, I want to give a special thanks again to Billy for joining us, to Beth for the expert navigation, and I want to say that I look forward at some point to now coming to Bexar County, now that I know that that is how it's pronounced. So I appreciate all of you who weighed in on the topic. You can tell I'm not a Texan, but I do like Texas, and I look forward to coming to that county sometime soon. So thank you all ever so much for joining us. I hope you have a great weekend.